Our club has always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas. Here, we offer access to dynamic political, business, and public personalities.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ali Giassi, and I'm treasurer of the Canadian Club of Toronto. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land that we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We are grateful for the opportunity to be able to come together to learn on this land. Now for our program. Organizations are busier than ever investing in digital technology with all of the energy and resources that entails. But leaders are still concerned that they are falling behind, not seeing a return on their investment, and not creating any differentiation for their organizations in a competitive market. Today's expert panel will discuss how organizations can think beyond digital and how leaders can execute these transformations. Before we hear from today's panel, I want to review a few housekeeping instructions. Please take note of the following. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. Once you click the questions tab, you can enter your questions in the window and they will be sent to the moderator. The request help button located in the bottom right corner of the page is for technical support. I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, PwC Canada, for helping to make this event possible. The Canadian Club is a not-profit, and we have been gathering people together for 125 years. It is because of our sponsors, our partners, and our members that we are able to do so. So thank you for your continued support. Now to introduce today's speakers. Ricardo Costa, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Purolator. Claudia Krywiak, President and CEO, Ontario Centre of Innovation. And Ron McKenzie, President, Rogers for Business. Today's discussion will be moderated by Chris Marr, Partner and National Leader for Strategy at PwC Canada. Another tradition that our club maintains is the toast we make to our country. If you have a beverage close by, please join me in a toast to Canada. And now, I'm delighted to turn things over to our moderator. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you, Ali, for the warm introduction. And on behalf of PwC Canada, thank you, Canadian Club Toronto, for allowing us to share this virtual space. And thank you, Ricardo, Claudia, and Ron, for sharing your perspectives on this interesting and very important topic. So on to the topic, we are in the fourth industrial revolution, dubbed Industry 4.0. And organizations are really busy digitizing. Yet, leaders are still concerned that they're falling behind. They're not seeing that return on their investments, and they're not seeing any real differentiation. So for today's panel conversation, the second half of our conversation, I will ask our panel for their perspectives on what organizations can do beyond simply digitizing to unlock value through their digital transformation efforts. And in the first half of our conversation, I'm going to ask the panel what they are seeing at a macro level, how the digital economy is changing, for example, how the Internet of Things, or the Internet of Everything, as I like to say, is driving Industry 4.0, and what that means for Canada's ability to compete globally. So with that, let's jump into our first theme, which is the digital economy, Industry 4.0, and Canada's global competitiveness. And perhaps I'll start with a bit of a point of view. We see the digital economy enabled by Industry 4.0 technologies like 5G, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing as critical in supporting Canada's post-COVID recovery. And we saw evidence of this during the pandemic. We saw population centers shifting. We saw consumer entertainment preferences and purchasing habits shifting. We saw shifts in the way businesses operate. And we continue to see shifts to more localized supply chains. And these have all punctuated our changing digital connectivity needs. PwC forecasts that the adoption of the Internet of Everything in terms of hardware, software, and connectivity will deliver $200 billion in incremental GDP to the Canadian economy from 2020 to 2040. So maybe with that setup, I'm going to turn now to our panelists with a couple of questions. And Claudia, maybe I'll start with you and then go to Ron and Ricardo. Simply, how do you see the digital economy evolving? And how are organizations creating value differently today than they did in the past?
Thanks, Chris. So at the Ontario Centre of Innovation, we have the opportunity to work with entrepreneurs and innovators that are developing and deploying new technologies. And that gives us line of sight in terms of where next, in terms of technology development, in terms of technology deployment, and specifically around Industry 4.0. So with respect to the digital economy, what we're seeing are, I would say, three things. One, we're seeing the rapid development of new applications of technology that are starting to reshape markets and alter business models. So what we're seeing, for example, in sectors like the agri-tech sector, we're seeing increased data analytics, increased digitization. We're seeing food processors, farmers, adopting new and innovative technologies. In the education sector, for example, we're seeing the rapid and widespread deployment of virtual and augmented reality solutions, and so forth and so on. Industry leaders across all sectors are starting to leverage Industry 4.0, and we are starting to see the digitization of supply chains. And by the digitization of supply chains, what we mean is the integration of automation, data analytics, logistic platforms, IoT, cloud-based technologies into all parts of the supply chain in Canada and globally. The pandemic accelerated a lot of the trends that we were already starting to see pre-pandemic, and it increased the demand for new technologies. And that demand, the increase in demand, we saw everywhere from Main Street all the way to Bay Street. What is interesting, though, is in terms of that acceleration, how much of that is going to be durable and how much of that is going to be transient. And by that, what we mean some of the more durable changes is as we emerge post-pandemic, I think remote work, virtual events are a lot more durable than people had anticipated. However, we're also seeing some transient trends. And if you look at companies like Peloton and Netflix, for example, as people start to return to in-person. So overall, rapid acceleration in terms of technology development, new applications of technology and technology adoption in general in Canada and globally.
Great, that's very insightful. Thanks, Claudia. Maybe Ron, would be interested in your perspective on this question as well.
Yeah, happy to, Chris, and it's great to join. Claudia hit on a lot of the key kind of dynamics. From the perspective, we have a very interesting opportunity that we see providing core infrastructure to so many businesses all across Canada. What we've seen is a lot of the lessons learned in this whole pivot through the pandemic have really started to bring to light the power of the investment in digitization, the way I'd frame it. So I think, you opened well with there's been this investment, big investments. Many companies have done, the digitization. But I think what happened was when confronted with that event of having to pivot the organization to a, for example, work from home scenario, and then pivot how you service your customer, we saw adoption and agility of different operating models at a pace that would not have happened if it wasn't a digitized foundation that was invested in. And I think that's one of the key things that we've seen. And I agree with Claudia. I actually believe this is actually foundational that, what we're seeing now after 2 years in this new operating environment, who would have thought that you could have all of your employees productively working from anywhere? And how do you enable that infrastructure now on not a one-time basis, but on a permanent basis, and enable that collaboration? And the way we're seeing it is companies that are really thriving through this have found ways to tap into agility, tap into the insights of their customer, and all of a sudden now use the knowledge and information gained from what their customers are doing, what they're looking for, to adapt quicker. And I think that pace of adaptation has been one of the real foundational kind of outcomes coming out of this. And all of that enabled and fueled by having the investment in the digital foundation. I could speak personally, at Rogers, we're in a shared workspace. So everyone is a work from anywhere when it was in the building, and very quickly pivoted 23,000 of our employees to work from home. And it was pretty seamless. We had to pivot our technicians in the way they would service customers not entering into the home. So how could we find different ways of using visual assistance and guidance and self-serve and self-install? And our customers adapted. So the digital economy really, as a foundational element, I highlight again, the pandemic kind of taught us we can be agile. Now with the ability to apply that in knowledge of the customer, we leverage the foundation that we have as an infrastructure. I truly believe you can actually build competitive advantage. And we're seeing so many companies thrive with that.
Thanks for that, Ron. Yeah, it almost feels like the last sort of 2 years has been it's basically a living experiment that we are watching unfold. And so what do we do with that going forward is going to be critical. Ricardo, maybe I'll ask you to sort of top up on what's been said as well.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Ron and Claudia said. And I actually split it into two moments. We have the pre-COVID digital transformation that we were going, and I think COVID is a little bit of a booster around that. I think the one thing that people are realizing, you were talking about the return on investment on digital, et cetera. The one thing people are realizing now, it's a lot about the underlying information that's being generated now. And that information that you never had before, and now you're combining information that didn't exist before, and now you're like, oh, I have a new business model here or something different. From a Purolator perspective, for example, if you think about our drivers that cannot work from home in a COVID environment, now they all have scanners, they're all enabled by 5G. And now we have, because of the technology we have, it's real-time information at the edge. Right. So I think that's the component. It's less about the technology and more about what do you do with it. I think the new digital economy is creating new partnerships, new technology, and how do we collaborate to use it? I think it's the key thing. the COVID component for me was interesting because we did see that at Purolator in the beginning of COVID, let's say the first 4 to 6 weeks, we actually have, from a package volume perspective, a drop. And this is mainly because companies were not prepared to live in a new world, which digitization was extremely important. And all of the sudden, you could really see which companies picked up really fast and kind of transformed really quickly, and the ones that didn't. And the companies that transformed pretty quickly are winning now. And they actually, 4 weeks, 6 weeks after the beginning of the first lockdown, our volume actually went like twofold. It was really like we got a lot of new volume, new dynamics within the supply chain. And that's basically because people started digitizing. Nobody did curbside pickup before, and now it's probably one of the most used channels in some of the retailers. So that's all a reaction to COVID. So I think COVID was a huge booster on digital transformation.
Yeah, I like sort of two things you've said there, Ricardo. One is, first of all, I think all of you have sort of touched on it. Innovation sort of born out of necessity in a way. And second, Ricardo, you were talking about the data and the knowledge that we have at our disposal now to do something with as organizations. I'd like to sort of describe the era that we're living in now as less about the digital era and more around the insights era. Actually, a good segue into the next theme, because you touched on it, Ricardo, around collaboration and ecosystems, and sort of the importance of these for success in the digital economy. And maybe I'll start with sort of a brief point of view on this. I think based on what I've just heard, it does feel like organizations will need to adopt more of a collaborative posture with their stakeholders in order to deliver those unique value propositions to their customers and to citizens. And by stakeholders, I would really broaden the definition of that to not just your customers and your employees, but your communities, your suppliers, the government. And so, I think what we've seen in other G7 countries, Australia, South Korea, many of these countries beginning to use industrial policy levers to really encourage those ecosystems and that collaboration. And so, I think my question to you as the panel is, are you seeing, first of all, it sounds like a growing need to collaborate with your stakeholders, create new ecosystems to drive that differentiation for your own organizations. And maybe, Ricardo, I'll go to you to start, and we can kind of go to Ron and Claudia afterwards.
Yeah, I'm a true believer that collaboration is going to be key on digital transformation. And you've seen most of the companies that are really succeeding. It's around ecosystems and how they're partnering up with adjacency, et cetera, et cetera. For example, at Purolator, we have a couple of examples in Purolator that illustrate that a little bit. One of our stakeholders clients is Switch Health, and they're a company that focuses on decentralized diagnosis of lab tests. So they're moving it to the home care. We had to work with them because they were actually providing the COVID tests for patients in Canada, and the pickup was at the home. So you actually do the test at home and send it to them. This is a core reverse logistics problem when you start thinking about it. It's a lot easier to move from a pharmacy to a bunch of homes than collect everything from homes and then move to a pharmacy. And so it was a big problem, and we had to collaborate with them to actually look at it from a different angle and really digitize the patient experience on the pickup management so we could actually be effective, because it was very time sensitive. Without that collaboration, and actually if we were just working on picking up something on someone's house, we would never be successful in that, because it was really how do we actually orchestrate that with them. So that was a key collaboration for us. But one that we are really proud of, Purolator is all about health and healthcare and how do we help mental health of our employees. We partner up with a data analytics company, focus on research and innovation. We got a government grant, and we created what we call the Mood app. And we just launched a couple months ago in pilot. And the idea is leveraging all the digital assets we have, the scanners, the 5G network, et cetera. And actually in the morning, trying to measure in a very simple way what is the mental health of the driver? If we can actually start getting that data, beginning of the day, end of the day, can we correlate that data with all the other data we have about that driver, the telematics of the truck, the mix of the truck, what are the packages that they're carrying? And if by any chance we can actually find insights, going back to your point, it's all about the insights age, where we can actually influence their mental health on the controllables we have, that would be a win. For example, if I know that when it's raining and the driver has 3 treadmills on their truck, they're more likely to have a not so good driver behavior. We might want, instead of saying, hey, you got to stop speeding or something like that, we might say, you know what, I can remove one of the treadmills of that truck, or we can change that route. So we can actually influence that in a digital way. Again, another one that by ourselves, we would never be able to do. We have universities helping us. We have private sector helping us. We have a government grant helping us. So it's a collaboration that's actually coming out as a very important component on our mental health right now for our employees.
Yeah, I love that story, Ricardo, because with the Mood app, because like it really kind of speaks to like what was the outcome that you were shooting for, in this case, improve mental health for your drivers versus just digitizing for the sake of creating an app. Ron, maybe I'll go to you next.
Yeah, Chris, when I think of the collaboration, there's kind of three sort of foundational elements. The first one that really I think has been key over the last little while is the collaboration and support with government and with municipalities, and that's just in the, I'll call it the foundation of connectivity everywhere, enabling this digital divide and closing the gap on the digital divide. And never in all of my years in telecom have we seen such collaboration and partnership with both government agencies in terms of how do we build, how do we expand, how do we enable connectivity. I think we forget sometimes we're the second largest landmass in Canada, second largest landmass in the world, with a population the size of the state of California. Yet we're trying to provide connectivity and richness of experience in every corner of our country. And so I think that on the first step is probably the really powerful collaboration and support. And that's a big part of where our expansion into the West and all the investments that we're making, that's a big one. The second one I'd point to is the universities. And I know Claudia will speak a lot more to this, but the partnerships that we have today that we've enabled primarily to leverage our coast-to-coast 5G infrastructure with, for example, University of British Columbia, more in the area of wildfire management, safety, ocean, seismic, early warning and detection, doing a lot with the universities at UBC, University of Calgary, University of Waterloo in terms of autonomous vehicle and management of smart devices and IoT. Industry working together with universities, and I'll call it incubating and then commercializing the technology. That's an area. And where we started to see that come to life is kind of the third area of collaboration is with our industry, both our customers and our partners in the industry. And a really good example that I think is that highlights is some of the work that we're seeing in one of the traditional industries, the resource industry, the mining industry in particular, is the partnership that we can speak to that we're working closely with Kirkland Lake Gold up in Northern Ontario. Here's a site, the Detour Lake mine site, that's 180 kilometers north of Cochrane. That wasn't a geography test, but it's way up there. And so that location, it's 80 square kilometers and has the most sophisticated, fully managed, all 5G network that is tracking autonomous vehicles, remote sensors, remote drones that have eyes on site. Once again, enabling industry in partnership to come together to enable different ways of operating and speed to market and competitive differentiation. That's the second largest gold mine in North America, and enabling that competitive advantage. A lot of that work was done together in partnership. And the last one I point to is seeing partnerships, and I could speak to what, for example, what we're doing coming out of COVID every single organization that we have the opportunity and customer that we talk to is dealing with this work from anywhere. How do I enable this to become a hybrid work environment? And how do I retain our employees from a competitive standpoint? Because all of a sudden now they can work from anywhere for any other company on a global stage. And so in that case is where we, example of partnership, teamed up collaborating with Microsoft to kind of bring a hybrid work solution together that enables, both our 5G cellular capability married with their collaboration capability like we're doing today, but enable that to be seamless work from anywhere. And I think that collaboration, both government, universities, and research together with industry, and all of us coming together, is really starting to bring to life use cases and examples where our customers are actually really innovating and creating that competitive differentiation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Ron, just to like, it's interesting to hear us talk about the use cases that the underlying infrastructure is enabling. It's not just about, installing, digital pipes in the ground anymore. But that being said, it is still important that we are continuing to invest in those pipes to enable these use cases that we're talking about here. So Claudia, maybe I'll go to you for your perspective on the question.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points that Ron made around just an increasing the level of collaboration. What we're seeing across what we would call the innovation ecosystem is unprecedented levels of collaboration between industry, between colleges, universities, and between all levels of government. And those partnerships and collaborations are unlocking tremendous value. And I'd like to provide two examples just to illustrate this point. The first one is something called Encore 5G, and it's a $400 million public-private partnership that was established about 4 years ago to build a pre-commercial 5G testbed across the Ontario-Quebec tech corridor. And the idea behind this testbed was, as we were developing the infrastructure and deploying 5G commercially, we wanted to give Canada's researchers, companies, and entrepreneurs an opportunity to start developing applications and start testing their product on a pre-commercial testbed. So when we have full deployment, there would be a competitive advantage for our companies. But in order to do something like that, no one firm or organization could achieve that. And so in the end, what the partnership brought together is it brought together 5 multinational companies that had significant R&D operations across Canada. It brought together 3 levels of government, the government of Canada and the governments of Ontario and Quebec. And it brought together multiple universities and colleges across Ontario and Quebec, as well as thousands of SMEs. And to Ron's point about the use cases, what that testbed enabled was it became a sandbox. It became an opportunity for companies, both large and small, and for researchers as well as entrepreneurs to test and develop new applications that are powered and enabled by 5G and to demonstrate them to potential customers. And something like that was not only a first of its kind in Canada, it was actually a first of its kind globally. And I recall at the event when this was being launched, various senior level people from the organizations that were participating came in, and one of the organizations had a delegation from Sweden. And one of the comments that was made was, Canada's probably the only country where you could have this level of collaboration. It really is our competitive advantage, where you can bring together industry, academia, multiple levels of government with a common goal. And at the end of the day, what you're achieving is actually you're accelerating time to market for the deployment of new technologies. So that's one example. And the second example I'd like to give is just something that happened during the pandemic. So there is a company called Aspire Food Group, and they're based in London, Ontario. And during the pandemic, they actually opened a state-of-the-art Industry 4.0 facility, a kind of a factory of the future in London, Ontario. And that was only made possible because it was a very collaborative model. And so that collaboration enabled an Industry 4.0 environment where you essentially have a factory that has full industrial IoT, that has sensors, that has automated storage and retrieval systems, et cetera. And the reason that was possible is because you had participation from operators, you had participation from kind of technology providers like Darwin AI, Swift Labs, and you also had participation from different levels of government. So Sustainable Development Technology Canada, the next NGen supercluster. And so it is really inspiring and also impactful when you have participation of all of these players across the innovation ecosystem in an initiative that fundamentally is much greater than the sum of its parts. So actually, there is no better time to collaborate than right now. And I fundamentally believe there's no better place than Canada to put together some really innovative collaboration models and partnerships.
Thanks, Claudia. And actually, a question has sort of rolled in that I think is related to this conversation we're just having. And by the way, if there are questions, please submit them. I'm receiving them here in real time as well, and we'll get to as many as possible. And the question that's come in, and I'll just open it to whoever on the panel would like to respond, has to do with supply, sort of the supply side and the demand side when it comes to the adoption, both the development of new technologies in Canada and IP, and the adoption and sort of commercialization of these technologies. And I think the individual asking the question is sort of curious as to whether there is sort of an imbalance as far as Canada's ability to sort of create new IP and sort of be a world leader as far as new innovation and technology through our various programs, some of which you just mentioned, Claudia, and the translation of that into the adoption and embedding of that into the Purolators of the world and other small, medium, and large enterprises. So I think the question here is just around, is there sort of a supply or demand or both issue? And if there is, or even if there is not, what can we do to sort of further encourage that adoption of new technology in Canada?
I'm happy to take the first stab at that. So that's the world that we live in. On the technology supply side, certainly we're seeing unprecedented levels in terms of new technology development by Canadian firms, and those technologies are incredibly exciting. They're attracting international attention, and one of the things that we do at OCI is we want to ensure that those companies that are developing that IP and those technologies in Canada, in Ontario, scale and grow in Ontario. That we don't become, Canada doesn't become essentially kind of the farm team in terms of technology for the world, where those technologies are actually not commercialized and scaled here, but they're actually commercialized and scaled in other parts of the world, and we don't get to benefit from that. And so I think the big opportunity that we have is on the demand side. It's companies like Rogers, like Purolator, but it's also the public sector becoming a first customer and an early adopter of those technologies. The two examples that I gave, those were actually in effect examples of bringing supply and demand together. When you're looking at a new technology that is being developed here, what you want to do is you want to connect that to the demand side. You want to connect that to the Purolators, to the Rogers of the world. You want that technology adopted, because then it presents a foundation for that technology to be scaled here, to be adopted here. And that not only provides a competitive advantage for the company that is developing that technology, because then they can export that technology to the world, but it also provides a huge competitive advantage for the companies for the early adopters and first customers in Canada of that technology, because we want to be able to benefit from what is developed here. So what we see is actually a huge opportunity. The good news is that we're starting to see increasingly the supply and the demand side come together, but there is an opportunity for a lot more investment in this area, and I would say an opportunity for a lot more participation. Purolator and Rogers, I would say, are examples of companies that are very actively engaging with the innovation ecosystem, that are very actively engaging with the kind of the local supply side, and we need to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, maybe I don't know, Ron or Ricardo, if you maybe if you want to.
Yeah, just from the receiver side now on the demand side, let's put it that way. What we are seeing now is, and I agree with what Claudia said, there's a lot of new things happening on the innovation side, and a lot of that happening right now. I think the challenge we have is a lot of times these companies are actually thinking internationally, not Canada-wide, right? So a lot of times, like I've run across many companies that we would say, okay, so we have a problem to solve, and they're like, well, but the scale in Canada is not good enough for us. Because to Ron's point before, it's the second largest country in the world, but we have a strip of people the size of, you mentioned California, I'm from Brazil, I usually say the size of the city of São Paulo, the population of São Paulo, from Pacific to Atlantic. So it's from a delivery perspective on my industry now, it's really tough to deliver in a landscape like that. So even our environment a lot of times is not as replicable outside Canada. So I think that's a little bit of the challenge we have. It's focusing on the problems we have in Canada and solving the problems in Canada that will actually allow us to scale up, et cetera. I think that's, again, from the receiving side, that's my perspective.
And Chris, I would offer, kind of along the same lines where Claudia and Ricardo are, as the infrastructure provider, the role that we're playing is very different now in the spirit of collaboration, where, we were the first to launch a 5G coast-to-coast network with a full 5G core. When you to put it in perspective, it's the last 30 years, over 65 billion in CapEx has been invested in the network infrastructure. And now we're opening that up to the universities, to developers, to people, to essentially be able to foster the speed and creativity that hasn't been available before. Now, once again, it's typically focused around specific use case examples. Like, so if I pick, Claudia's brought a few good examples that we see. If I look at University of Waterloo and our partnership as a provider, it's not only providing the dollars to fund, but it's actually providing the 5G infrastructure to let the experimentation actually happen and actually let it be created so we can see impacts on the network, we can see scale. And I think sometimes, 5G it isn't fully appreciated by, everyone. And I think that might be worth a minute. What this is, an order of magnitude change in what it enables versus a previous generation 4G network. And so, yes, it has higher throughput speeds, 100 times faster throughput speed, but the big advantage is 10 times the number of connected devices per kilometer. So now all of a sudden, I can capture information at a density that I could never have imagined in a 4G infrastructure. So I've got foundational differentiation in the ecosystem. And what it does now is allow different ways of approaching problem solving. So as an example, with the University of British Columbia, the forecast is at some point seismic activity and faults, off the shores of Vancouver Island. And so earthquake detection is critical, similar to early wildfire detection. So with the University of British Columbia, in the past, in a 4G infrastructure, they could only have beacons every so many kilometers apart. With 5G, I can tenfold the density and get a 90+% accuracy that there is a issue that I need early warning detection against. So if I didn't have the infrastructure and make it available, it enables the innovation to really come to life. So it's not just bringing the financial support, but it's actually solving a real world problem that is near and dear to both government, municipalities, et cetera, and doing that in collaboration with the university to start to bring those things to life. And, you know, we saw some of the early adoption in COVID. There were some of the islands in the Queen Charlotte's that, you know, the ferry service stopped running in certain areas with COVID. And we were able to do drone delivery of medical supplies and, more importantly, COVID tests instead of sitting on the shelf for multiple days where, you know, it may have impacted the quality of the test. We're able to pick up with drone technologies because of the 5G coverage across the physical area. So the innovation happened really fast. So I would say that we have a fabulous opportunity as a provider of infrastructure, but it is, as Claudia said, in partnership with the universities, the research centers, and making it available that we can see that innovation and then very quickly the adoption and commercialization start to come at pace we've not seen before. And I think that's a big, big foundational differentiation for the Canadian innovation we can bring.
Well, guys, I mean, it's been a really rich conversation. Ali, I feel like we may need another Canadian Club event to do it full justice. But I do want to just move to our third theme here, which kind of ties back to the original question for the panel, which was around, you know, again, if being digital is not enough, right? Like what and how can organizations achieve more meaningful digital transformation in today's new context? And I think we've sort of touched on this question in a number of different ways, but let me maybe just add a little bit of color to it, specifically around what I mean around today's new context. And you know, what we see are sort of three things that have shifted. So one on the demand side, one on the supply side, and one on just in terms of the context in which businesses, organizations operate. On the demand side, you know, I think in today's digital era or insights era, as we talked about, I mean, consumers just have instant access to more choices, and they have, you know, instant access to insights into the quality of those choices, and that's resulting in consumers having a much higher set of expectations of the companies and the organizations in which they interact. So that's sort of, let's call it a revolution on the demand side. On the supply side, I would say, you know, unlike past decades where large companies were able to use their scale to sort of win in the market, you know, through mass production and distribution, today's tools like cloud technology are allowing smaller firms, you know, to achieve scale without actually owning it. So barriers to entry are sort of reducing. And what's resulting is more of an ecosystem-driven economy to some of what we've just been talking about here. And then the third thing that's shifted is the actual sort of context in which businesses and organizations operate today. And by that, I mean that the motivation is not only around profits, but it is increasingly around balancing that with other factors like employee equity, ESG impacts, supplier ethics, global interconnectedness. So, you know, there's been a bit of a transformation of context as well in which businesses operate. So, kind of with that backdrop, the question that I want to come back to with you as the panel is, with that changed context, what does that imply around what organizations and companies can do differently as you think through your digital transformation journeys? Again, beyond just digitizing and to be right-sized for this new context. So maybe I'll start with you, Ricardo, and then you know, we'll go to Ron and Claudia.
Yeah, I fully agree. Digitization is not enough, and I think it's a little bit of a buzzword. A lot of times, it's like, oh, it sells, right? So we have a lot of that, and in innovation is the same thing. And I'm the techie guy who loves the gadget and the shiny toy. So I fully understand that. But I think it's a quote from Jeff Bezos: innovation, digitization is not really an obsession with technology, but it's an obsession with customer behavior. And when you change customer to behavior, to people's behavior. I think that's where digitization at the end, digital transformation, it's a tool, right? I get excited when we talk about 5G, for example, but most people, no disrespect to Ron and Rogers, but most people don't care about 5G. They care about what they're using and how they're using and what 5G is enabling them to. And I think that's the key, and that's one thing that at Purolator we keep it at our core, is what problem we're trying to solve. Great that we have this new technology. Do I need to break anything to use this new technology, or are we actually solving a problem? So that, to me, that's the point. It's how we start using, and there's so much technology out there that can solve, but we need to come up with the concept that it's an enabler, not, it's a means to an end, not the end goal. And I think that's where it becomes extremely important. And if you have that mindset, like the real return on investment will come. And then you can start using that for ESG. We're using, as I mentioned, the Mood app. There's no return on investment. Of course, there is return, but there's no like hard financial benefits on the Mood app. It's really about mental health. It's really about health and safety of the employee. So again, enabled through 5G, enabled through a cool app, enabled through a bunch of digital things, but that's not the problem. The problem we're trying to solve is mental health. I guess that's where my mind goes when we're talking about, is it enough? No, it's an enabler.
Ron?
Yeah, I'm with Ricardo in that it's an enabler. It's a foundation, but I think if you step back and you go, well, what's next? I think there is some incredible power in how it enables understanding customer needs, customer behavior, customer change, customer sentiment. One of the things that we are absolutely seeing now is this organizations that are really pivoting to the world class. They're pivoting from a place of where they were reactive to try and become proactive, and now trying to become predictive. Can I actually move through that state of reactive to proactive? And if I can live into a world that's predictive, then I should be able to understand the next need or the next understanding or the customer experience. You know, a good example is if I know someone's having a difficult customer experience, they might have had an impact or something might have happened. If I can predict that ahead of time and I can resolve it, it's a completely different customer experience that you're bringing to life. And I think organizations now are starting to really build on the knowledge and information that most of digitization is brought to cloud. And now through cloud, advanced analytics to start to do predictive behavior of advanced analytics to just get a better understanding of the customer. And I think that's where we saw so many organizations be able to pivot quickly because they were able to predict where their customer needs were going to be. And if you're able to do that, I think there's a fundamental change that you can disrupt in the marketplace. The second part that I would point to is organizations, I think, realizing it's important to be human. And you touched on this in your opening. And what I mean by that is really understanding the customer, reflecting through our representation, reflecting who we are in the community, reflecting our customers in the community, and more importantly, serving our customers. And I use that word on purpose, serving our customers where they want to be served, how they want to be served. And the digital foundation just enables that ability to do that. And, there is innovation that has happened and customer behavior changes very quickly. We saw that happen in COVID, where all of a sudden, I purchased everything online. And now what we're seeing is a completely different pivot now. People want the experience. They want to be able to interact. And so I think as organizations, our duty and where the beyond digital is, can we get to that predictive space and use the knowledge and become more insights and reflective and then agile to deliver in that space?
Thanks, Ron. Claudia?
So I'd like to kind of pick up on a couple of things that both Ricardo and Ron mentioned. And the first one is customer experience and innovative approaches to customer experience. in terms of digital transformation, the development and the adoption of digital technologies is key to competitiveness. But on its own, it's not enough. And I just want to use the following example to illustrate that point. Last week in the Globe and Mail, there was a great article about a startup called Fable. They're located at the 111 Tech Accelerator on Front Street. So if you want to visit them, they're local. They're right here. And what they do is that they have a platform. It's an accessibility platform that focuses on helping companies that have gone digital improve the experience that their users who have accessibility challenges have with the technology. And their clients are companies like Microsoft, Shopify, Walmart, Meta, et cetera. So you might think, well, like those companies have already digitized. You know, they've got it right. But those companies know digitization isn't enough. So they're working with companies like Fable to actually improve the customer user experience, to open up new market opportunities, to acquire many more users that they wouldn't have had access to before. So it's simply not enough to digitize. If you're talking about digital transformation, you need to look at approaches, innovative approaches to improving customer experience. And the second piece is not only improving customer experience, but also improving employee experience. I think in the digital economy, employee experience is going to be incredibly critical. Talent, the global competition around talent was only accelerated by the pandemic. I think Ron mentioned some of those challenges, and as we digitize, as workforces become more remote, a lot more kind of virtually mobile, I think the employee experience is going to be really, really critical. So in terms of unlocking real value along the digital transformation journey, it's both about innovative approaches to customer experience, but also innovative approaches to employee experience.
No, thank you for those perspectives, guys. And just looking at the time here, we probably have about 5 minutes to go. Again, I know we could probably go the full day here. So I'm just going to go to a couple of questions that have rolled in that I think actually relate to some of what we've just talked about. So one question, and whoever wants to chime in, feel free. I think this question comes from somebody who is in an organization that is not a large enterprise, that is sort of more of a small business. And as you know, I mean, small businesses, they don't necessarily have large budgets to spend on innovation and research and development. And it also sounds like this individual is in a sector where, maybe traditional ways of doing things there's sort of a lot of inertia around that. So the question really is, what would you say around some of the themes we've been talking about, specifically for small businesses who are, just sort of day to day, probably not spending a whole lot of mind share on how to adopt new technologies. Maybe I'll open it up to any one of the panelists to chime in on that one.
Maybe I can start. One of the things, I'll just do a plug for the Ontario Centre of Innovation. That's what we do. We help small and medium-sized organizations develop and adopt new technologies to become much more innovative. So come talk to us, come find us. There are lots of supports and resources across the entire innovation ecosystem, whether it's government supports or opportunities to partner with other organizations. What I would say is one of the most powerful things a small company can do is look for opportunities to collaborate. Look for opportunities to collaborate either with potential partners on joint ventures or opportunities to collaborate with customers in the development of their technologies. That's probably the most powerful thing that they can do. And there are resources across Ontario and across Canada to help companies do that, especially small and medium-sized companies.
And just to echo what Claudia is saying, the collaboration is the number one thing. The Mood app that I talked about a couple of times is actually an OCI grant with partnership with a small business that we're building together. So if you don't have the resources or the time, the collaboration, and it's that ecosystem discussion we were having before, that is key to push things forward.
my add-on would be the digital foundation. Even as a small business, we saw small businesses and many of our customers change their business models, move online, move to a complete different buying methodologies. And it was done because of partnerships and use of technologies and solutions that were out there. And all of a sudden, that small business that was the lifeblood of the local community was able to completely pivot and then offer a capability, keep their employees employed, but move everything to a digital online. And we watched that happen. And to both Claudia and Ricardo's, we would encourage collaboration. Absolutely was an area that, I know we spent a lot of time with a number of small businesses. How fast can we get them in the pandemic to help them transform their businesses? And I'd encourage you, definitely work with, your partners, work with people in your community and lean in on resources like Claudia's team that can help transform, because small business, that is the community. And very much, we saw so much innovation that local provider could stand digitally with the same as some of the big international providers. And what happened was the customers wanted to buy local, and the customers pivoted to local to support their local business. So it's, once it became digitally enabled, the human part kicked in and it became part of the community and made a real differentiation. So collaboration is really key.
Great, thanks all. So I see Ali is back. Ali, do we have time for a quick last question, or do we need to
maybe 30, maybe 1 minute left?
Okay. So maybe I'll pose the question, and one of the three of our panelists can perhaps chime in with the response. And this really has to do with sort of the inclusion of ensuring that digital technologies are adopted and accessible to the full sort of array of peoples across our country. And specifically, the question that is coming in is around our Indigenous communities. And so that really is the question: how can we ensure that digital technologies are also benefiting and accessible to our Indigenous communities?
Well, maybe as an infrastructure provider, Chris, I can very quickly. This is an area that is big gains in partnership together with government, with municipalities, to enable connectivity and also technology innovation into Indigenous bands, where, I have examples where we're partnering with the band that they can then serve the members on the band or within the band. And it's all about enabling and creating equal access anywhere. And once again, in the past, it was typically done with one technology. Now with 5G, with fixed wireless access, with a number of areas that innovation has come to play, I can speak to a number of locations across the country partnered with government where we're enabling connectivity to really bridge that digital divide. And that's an investment that is a continual investment, and no place across the country should there be underserved that don't have the same access. And that's an area that, I can speak that we're making major investments across the country to bring that together in partnership with governments and municipalities.
Great, thank you. Well, with that, Ali, I'll pass it back to you for a conclusion.
Thanks very much, Chris. Really appreciate it. Look, Ricardo, Claudia, Ron, thank you for taking the time to join us today. That was a fascinating discussion. Maybe a couple of points that I will take away. One is the degree to which the pandemic has become the proof point for why digital investment is now core to business strategy. I think in essence, the COVID experience, which of course no one was able to avoid, has demonstrated that technology adoption and agility is critical in delivering value for customers, attracting and retaining talent, and providing a competitive edge. And then second, we can't do this alone. Technology adoption and digital investment depends on partnership. The need for this collaboration, especially between industry, higher education institutions, and government, is an essential element if we're going to foster innovation and competitiveness in our economy. So thank you for inspiring us to think about these issues. Chris, thank you for expert guidance in today's conversation. Thank you again to our sponsor, PwC Canada, for your generous support of today's discussion. Thank you also to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications, and LiveMeeting.ca for making it possible for us to gather virtually today. Guests, we hope you'll join us for some of our upcoming events. On June 1st, we'll host an in-person conversation with National Inuit leader Nathan Obet, where he'll discuss the federal Inuit Nunavut policy and building a Canada where all Inuit can thrive. And on June 8th, we host a virtual discussion on what's next for Conservatives in Canada. Our panel will feature Adrian Batra of the Toronto Sun, former MP Lisa Raitt, and Chad Rogers of Crestview. To learn more about our upcoming events, explore our website at canadianclub.org, browse our rich archive of past events, and check out our new updated membership categories with enhanced benefits at a variety of levels. Please consider becoming a member to support our club's work. Thank you for joining us today. Please stay healthy and safe and have a wonderful afternoon.